Joining me now, the author of Fossil Future and founder of EnergyTalkingPoints.com, Alex Epstein. Alex, good to see you, man. How are you?
Good to see you again. Doing great. People don't usually see me with the tie, but I just did a panel with Secretary Chris Wright and Senator Mike Lee on the energy future. So that's why I'm all dressed up. I got my nuclear tie on.
well, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
You do talk about the need for true American energy dominance, but the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. What's going on, at the UN with this, insane carbon tax?
Yes, I mean, the UN has really been the number one villain in the US energy story. They've pushed this idea of net zero by 2050, which means basically eliminate all fossil fuels or close to all fossil fuels by 2050. And they've tried these different scams for it. So like last year, they tried to get $1 trillion a year in reparations, largely paid by us. And, obviously that's not going to happen under the current administration. But what they're currently doing covertly is trying to pass an ocean carbon tax through something called the International Maritime Organization, which is another kind of UN body. And this is something that it slipped under my radar. So I've started sharing it with everyone I could, everyone I know in the different parts of the administration, because this is something the administration can stop, particularly the State Department can stop. But it's the kind of thing that's usually given to kind of a low-level functionary. And there's just so many bad things that the world does, and so many bad things, honestly, Biden did, that it's hard to keep track of all of them. So that's why I wanted to sound the alarm about this one, because if this were passed at the high end of what they're talking about, $150 a ton, that doubles the price of fuel for us, ocean fuel for our tankers and this kind of thing, and container ships. And that makes everything in our economy more expensive, and it hurts America most of all. So I'm glad you're aware of it, because hopefully it spreads the word to others. Mike Lee, Senator, posted about this today. So I'm glad people are on top of it now.
Well, Mike's a good friend. I mean, give us some of the high-level details of just how bad this would be and what it aims to do, because you're right. America always ends up bearing the brunt of this, right? If it was the Paris Climate Accords, China may look at it in 2030, and India, and the world's biggest polluters by a lot. America's going to destroy their middle class, destroy everything, do something, and then at the end, those guys will renegotiate in 2030 and say they were just kidding. They need 10 more years to get there yet, and we destroy our middle class. Funding this ridiculous nonsense while the worst offenders continue to do it unabashedly.
Right. So that's the thing on the large scale. I mean, this particular thing, though, is significant. So we often give these figures in dollars per ton. So people hear like $150 a ton. That doesn't sound that bad. But if you translate it to a gallon of gasoline, it's like $1.25 per gallon of gasoline. Wow. And it's actually even more for the kind of oil that we're using on container ships. So just imagine that every ship that's transporting across the ocean for us is doubling in fuel cost. Fuel cost is a huge component of other costs. This is why when oil prices go up, everything prices go up. Now, it's hard enough to keep oil prices low through profitable production, but this is deliberately trying to raise a new tax on us just to because people don't want us to be using oil. That's one thing people need to realize when they hear the other side sometimes talk about, we want lower gasoline prices. That's not true. They actually want higher gasoline prices, because that's the only thing that'll discourage people from using gasoline, or in this case, fuel oil for ships.
So how does all of this relate to what we've seen with the, not so aptly named Inflation Reduction Act subsidies? What it's really just about shutting down the ability to make oil make sense. So,
well, it's a little different for those. So like if you want to think about, the broad agenda of like, there's the green new scam aspect of it. Yep. And then there's the end fossil fuels aspect of it. And they both claim to be about replacing fossil fuels. But one of them, like this carbon tax and the net zero thing, that's focused on elimination by sort of punishing us directly. And by the way, that's the most honest way of doing it. If you don't want people to use fossil fuels, punish them for using fossil fuels. But what the Green New Scam does, the IRA, so the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which, as you mentioned, shouldn't be called that. It should be called the Inflation Act, because it raises prices by subsidizing expensive, unreliable energy in large part. What it does, for the next 10 years, if we don't stop it, it's $1 trillion added to the debt. So $1 trillion in a decade, many more trillions after that, by the way, but $1 trillion added to the debt. And what it's doing is it's propping up different forms of energy that can't compete on the market. So the worst example of this is what's called the Clean Electricity Tax Credit that applies primarily to wind and solar. So we're talking on the order of $300 billion over 10 years. But that's not the worst of it. It's the worst of it is not that we're paying this much in term what's ultimately going to be inflation. The worst of it is this money gets paid to distort the grid because it basically tells utilities, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money if you buy unreliable solar and wind, and that money gets taken away from gas and coal plants. So it's actually defunding gas and coal plants, which is the worst thing in the world right now because we have an electricity crisis and we need way more electricity for increasing demand, especially from AI. So the whole IRA thing,
Yeah.
it's this whole it really is a green new scam. I think that's the way to put it. And the president ran on we're going to terminate the green new scam. And what everyone needs to realize is that's the IRA. The IRA was the green new scam. It's this premise that if we subsidize expensive, unreliable electricity and energy, somehow we're going to reduce our CO2 emissions. Instead, it doesn't even reduce CO2 emissions much. It just creates this incredible amount of waste and distortion. So I think, all Republicans and really everyone should stand up against this thing. But right now, there's a lot of lobbyists trying to keep it up, unfortunately.
Yeah, and with wind and solar, I mean, not nearly as reliable, but I mean, it seems like nuclear goes up against the same stuff as fossil fuels, but it's very reliable, very safe and efficient, especially these days, right? You don't have to build on a fault line in the 50s when you don't necessarily know these things. Now you're getting into small modular reactors and all this kind of technology. It seems like we could do all of these things quite easily, but they keep pushing up these other technologies. Solar, I mean, you've forgotten more about solar than I'll ever know, but I sort of feel like I've heard about solar being like the newest big deal for like the last 30 years. It's never really matriculated.
Yeah, so with solar, when they give the hype, this is one thing that came up with my panel with Secretary Wright and Senator Lee today. They often will talk about like, hey, solar capacity is going down in cost. And the term capacity, if you ever hear that used with solar, you're dealing with a weasel. Because when you talk about the capacity of something unreliable, it's not really a capacity. It's just a hope. So the capacity of a natural gas plant is the ability to produce an exact amount of energy on demand. With solar, it's just a hope based on the weather. So they'll say the capacity of solar has gotten really cheap, but that's not what delivers reliable electricity. In order for solar to actually be cheap, the panels need to be cheap, the transmission needs to be cheap, and this is crucial, the batteries and supporting storage need to be cheap. And that's where all the expense is.
Yeah.
So that's why people say, oh, solar is so cheap, but then we add all this solar and electricity somehow becomes more expensive. That's because solar doesn't replace the reliable energy, it adds to the cost of reliable energy.
So what are your thoughts on nuclear as a solution for some of our energy needs? And you're right. I mean, with the advent of AI and all the stuff that you're doing, we don't produce enough energy to actually be the leaders in that movement. And I think for America to remain at the top, we actually have to start producing enough to be able to do that. Otherwise, someone else is going to do it before us.
Yeah, for sure. So I think of nuclear as the biggest energy tragedy because really in the late 60s, early 70s, America was the world leader in nuclear. We were producing cheap, reliable, and this is important, safe. Nuclear is the safest practical energy technology ever invented. So whatever people tell you, it's the safest thing ever. So even nuclear then was the safest thing. And instead of embracing that, the green movement, that claims to care about pollution and now CO2, they shut it down by regulating it to the point of criminalizing it. So we basically had 50 years of handicaps to the point where from the time the NRC came into existence, Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1975 to 2023, so 48 years, we didn't have one new plant go from conception to completion. And the ones that did, the Vogtle ones, those were 10 times about over cost. So we've taken a technology that should have gotten way cheaper and made it catastrophically more expensive. Now, fortunately, we have some really good people in the administration, particularly chairman of the NRC now, David Wright, is really good, and he understands some of the fundamental deregulatory things that need to happen. If people go to my website, energytalkingpoints.com, they can look at our energy plan. There's a lot of really detailed things that need to be done by the administration and by Congress to undo this criminalization. One of them is called linear no threshold. It's a model that says any amount of radiation is dangerous, which is absurd. That's like saying any amount of sunlight is absurd. Yeah. But based on that, they set the radiation levels 50 times lower than they should be. And they make all this stupid overbuild of everything. And it literally does not save one fraction of one life, but it makes nuclear catastrophically expensive. So there are like 8 things on that level that need to be changed. And I'm optimistic that we can, but this is part of the reason why I try to work behind the scenes with people to help them with this, because this is really urgent. And, we only have a certain amount of time with energy friendly people. We only know, how long, we don't know how long it's going to last. So I'm trying to take advantage of it at the moment.
So, Alex, talk a little bit about how the Biden administration really stood in the way of energy innovation, especially when it comes to clean coal, which the left obviously hates. From my understanding, the Department of Energy even holds the patents to some of the fossil fuel technology, but hasn't actually been licensing or putting it in the public domain to actually be utilized. The previous administration refused it, they buried it. What can Secretary Wright do about just that?
Well, just to answer your first question, I was smiling because saying like they didn't, help the innovation is like saying, Tanya Harding didn't help Nancy Kerrigan's innovation. I mean, it was a
They took a
deliberate
crowbar to
effort.
innovation, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very deliberate effort, both through what's called the whole of government climate agenda, which just means the whole of government anti-fossil fuel agenda, but also a lot of things subtly at the EPA. So what they would do is they would set what's called NACS, National Ambient Air Quality Standards. They would set it, particularly with something called PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5. At a ridiculously low level that is not scientifically or economically or certainly in terms of health justified, and they would do that not to protect air quality, but because it was a backdoor at shutting down fossil fuels for climate reasons. So you have to imagine the Biden administration was just a monomaniac about shutting down fossil fuels for climate reasons, and their number one target was coal. Now, this was a disaster because coal, even now, is 1/6 of our reliable capacity, our actual capacity that we can call upon on demand. And they really made it their mission to eliminate it by any means that they could. For example, they had these EPA regulations that you might have heard of that demanded that every coal plant shut down unless it can capture 90% of CO2. Okay, we have 2,000 coal plants in North America. Exactly two of them capture any CO2 on a commercial scale. Neither of them is close to 90%. That's never been achieved. And they're all catastrophically expensive. So it basically banned all coal plants. So it was just it's so bad because now we have increase in demand, right? So we just
Yeah.
destroyed the supply and now we have increase in demand. So what can be done? I mean, definitely any of these technologies, we shouldn't slow walk them insofar as they're available. But here are the things we need to do. First of all, get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly the solar and wind subsidies, because as long as you have those, you're defunding the coal plants and they cannot stay alive. The other thing, and Administrator Zeldin is doing is off to a great start here, but you need to stop the EPA's absolute like demolition of coal, which they've done through so many fronts. And one thing that I'm sure they'll get to, but is really important is they have to look at what's called the state implementation plans for different states, because what those are doing is they're preventing coal plants from utilizing their full capacity by having very irrational caps on different kinds of emissions. So what you need is basically let's stop shutting down the coal plants and then let's utilize the coal plants to their capacity, because if you the easiest electricity to get is the electricity we already have, but we have a lot of coal plants that we're threatening to shut down and we're not using fully. Let's reverse both of those.
So, Alex, what does American energy dominance look like, and what's the moral case for fossil fuels?
So in terms of what energy dominance looks like, so I think of it primarily through what I call an energy freedom lens. So it means every form of energy is free to produce and compete as producers judge best and consumers judge best. You just can't, unreasonably endanger others, by harming their land or fouling up their air or that kind of thing. But besides that, may the best man win. I mean, we didn't have we didn't have computer plans and stuff like this. We just let the computer manufacturers be free. So I think the key to energy dominance. So I think of energy dominance as a combination of prosperity and security. And both of those are primarily achieved through energy freedom. So freedom for example, getting in the way of impediments to oil and gas production, getting in the way of impediments to pipelines, particularly gas pipelines. That and the grid are the number one and two issues that we have to fix. Unleashing affordable, reliable electricity by getting rid of preferences for unreliable electricity and by getting rid of irrational attempts to shut down coal and even natural gas plants. You need to unleash nuclear. You need to get rid of this idea that we're going to protect ourselves from climate danger by destroying the American economy. No, you protect yourself from climate danger by being incredibly resilient. That's why, by the way, our climate deaths are down 98% over a century because we've become so much more resilient using fossil fuels. And then we innovate in a free market. If you want lower carbon energy, don't destroy America and then China's still building 300 new coal plants.
Yeah.
Actually innovate new technologies like nuclear. So that's what it takes to get energy dominance. In terms of the moral case for fossil fuels, it's very simple. if you want a world that is a much better place to live for human beings, you need affordable, reliable energy for as many of the 8 billion people in the world as possible. And fossil fuels are the only thing for the foreseeable future that can do that. And any negative side effects they have, including climate, are tiny compared to those benefits. That's why, as I said, with climate, we've gotten far safer from climate. So people need to understand energy is so valuable. Nothing is better for human life than unleashing energy. And almost any problem you can solve with more energy. And if you don't have much energy, you have every problem in the world.
Well, Alex, thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this. Let everyone know what your Twitter handle and stuff like that, because again, you know more, in the times we've spoken, you just understand the energy side and a lot of the stuff that's not being told to the American people as we're making these decisions. And so people are making decisions in a vacuum without all of that knowledge. Where can they find you and follow you?
So you can so my Twitter is at Alex Epstein. And then we have, a website, energytalkingpoints.com. People can actually talk to fake me through alexepstein.ai. It's actually really good. People in government really use alexepstein.ai. And I would say anyone who's a political official or anything like that, or you're working on these things, you can just email me directly. Like if you want an answer to some question, I have a good team. We can answer anything. So my email is alex@alexepstein.com.
Very nice. Well, Alex, thank you again, man. I really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.